Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, I talk about Into the Wild with Grayson Foster. On first glance, this movie appears to be a tragedy. But what if the tragedy would have been Chris giving up on his dream? How can we kill the false being within and victoriously conclude our spiritual pilgrimage? This will require planning, community, and maybe most of all, perseverance. Let's go climb that hill and discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me today from Nashville is Grayson Foster. How you doing today, Grayson?
Oh, Paul, I'm excellent. I'm happy to be here.
So, Grayson, you've been working behind the scenes with the podcast for over a year and a half now, at least.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
We met through mutual friend Will. We met through there because I was looking for somebody to do the audio stuff, the audio mixing, and he said, he's my guy.
Yeah, well, Will's a decent guy.
He's okay.
Yeah, no, best friends since transitional kindergarten. I could call it falling in love with him. I really did, immediately.
That sounds actually pretty accurate.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful that it worked out that way. So, and I appreciate, working with you and all the time we've put in, and I've listened to a lot of these, and I'm thrilled to finally get to come on here and talk about a film and one that I'm extremely passionate about as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Into the Wild today. And before I get into that, because I think just from what little I know of your story, there's a certain and I think you even mentioned this on our texting, that you sort of connected with the Alex/Chris character. So right now, just sort of, I'm just like all the things that you're doing, pursuing what you feel you're calling your dreams, your passions, but like what all the things are you up to these days?
But yeah, I mean, I'm spread out. So I'm a singer-songwriter and a musical artist, probably first and foremost. And then I work with Will on films doing sound design, which is what brought me here to Men at the Movies. And I also do some part-time financial label work with a music label here in Nashville. So a little bit of everything. But I'm most passionate about music and film. It's really what I feel called to be a part of and to pursue. I did go to school for finance though, so I felt like it'd be good to use the degree that my parents paid for.
One of the big tips of advice for creative people is you guys need to have multiple sources of revenue.
Exactly.
Because you never know when one might dry up.
Yeah, I'm hoping one of these songs one of these days, because I've heard about those mailbox money that everyone in the industry talks about. And I'm waiting for that to come in. That'd be great.
You get money in the mailbox?
Yeah, you have a song, and all of a sudden, it's the same thing as people who get residuals for TV. You're not really expecting it because you did it, 5-10 years ago, and you're like, oh, look at that, there's a check.
That hasn't happened for you yet?
Not yet. Wait till next year. I got some stuff coming out next year.
That's right. So what do you have coming out next year? You seem to tee me up for that one. So I was
yeah. Well, right now it looks like it's going to be 5 singles that'll all be wrapped up into a little EP towards the end of the year. I think the first one we're looking at putting it out in March or April. Okay. It's a very cool year because I finally feel like I'm coming into my sound and my vision for my artistry at the same time where I'm coming into my humanness, I would call it. I'm about to be 30, which I think for a while was really daunting, but over the past few months, as I think about it, I'm more excited to be 30 than I ever thought I would be. Part of that is because I found myself staring out my window, naming birds at my bird feeder. And I'm like, that's a 30-year-old thing at least.
At least. That
At
might
least.
be, it's definitely a 40-year-old thing.
Yeah. So, partially like it's acceptance of that, but also I feel great and I feel confident in the man that I am. And I know what I want to do.
Nice. And when you say you're sort of discovering coming into your own sound, how would you describe your sound?
Well, that's where it gets hard because you could listen to it. And I think you might hear that I'm sort of discovering it, but I guess the best way that I say is I feel like I write pop songs from a more folk perspective, and then you can't take the North Carolina out of the boy, North and South Carolina out of the boy. So it's got a little bit of twang to it.
Yeah.
But most of the production is like pop, folk pop, and rock production.
Nice.
I don't like to be put in a box, One song might be rock, one song might be folk.
Right. You never know.
Right.
But so where can people find your music?
Any music platform, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, all those. If you want to check out some of the music videos that me and good old Will Branner have done, those are up on my YouTube page. I'm trying to get better at the socials. I sort of took a break this year, which was really nice. But I'll be putting a lot of stuff out on YouTube and Instagram. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's I'm Grayson Foster.
Nice.
Grayson Foster was taken. I've offered the guy at least $20, but he's
like, yo, that's also my name.
Yeah, he's very fond of it.
So yeah, and all the links will be available here in the show notes and on our webpage, minutethemovies.com/podcast. Although we're getting, I got tired of the socials as well, but I am hiring somebody to work on that stuff. So
there you go. That's what you need.
Yeah, there you go. So it is interesting how you're describing your journey a little bit. It does feel like it mirrors Chris's character in this movie, in this book. And you said you had to read the book. It was required reading back in high school.
Yes. 9th grade, Mr. Harris's English class. And it was one of the ones that was assigned that I actually read.
Wait, what did you do with the other one?
Well, I'm a little picky and choosy. If I don't know, so, if I wasn't inspired by the assigned reading, I'd kind of figure it out, But every now and then there was one that they picked where I was like, this is an amazing book. Maybe I do like books.
Yeah, it's like music. You like music, but there's some music that's amazing. Some movies are amazing. Some are trash.
Mm-hmm.
But this is really one of the first ones that we've talked about. It's not really a documentary, but it's about somebody who's, lived, whose parents and really a lot of the people in the movie are still alive, I would guess.
Yeah, I think so.
And we were talking before about how it was interesting. Even, there was a sort of an acknowledgement before the credits, how they thanked Chris McCandless's family, right? Thanks mom and dad and sister, which is interesting because it didn't really paint them in a very flattering light.
Right.
In some ways it feels sort of like I don't want to be like offensive or harsh to anybody, but let's see, where do I want to go?
I would say above all, seek truth. maybe that line stuck with them.
Well, and I think we will talk about a little bit about the parents' journey. We talk a lot about how the best stories are those stories that show transformation and revelation. And in this movie, I'm not sure Chris's character changed that much, but you did see the shift in the parents and an impact on the people around him. So that's, I think, the direction we're going to go today. But as I keep forgetting sometimes, or I forget sometimes to ask the question. So Grayson, why did you pick this movie when you're like, hey, I'm ready to come on the podcast and this is the movie I want to do? Why did you pick this one?
Well, I love the themes that I get from it, which to me are both connection and disconnection. And also, along with that, I mean, you're talking about a film with quite possibly one of the best original soundtracks of all time.
It's amazing.
Yeah, with Eddie Vedder. I think that maybe is what turned me on first. But I just had a real like reaction to it the first time that I saw it. When we read the book, we had to read the book first, and then he told us to watch the film. And every time I watch it,
which for you is actually probably pretty close to ninth grade, wasn't it? When it came out
think
in
so.
2007.
Yeah, so 2 years,
15 years ago.
Basically,
So
it was 2 years old when we saw it. And I've watched it maybe like once every 2 years. It's not quite one of those movies that I watch every year. It's usually probably like once every 2 years. And every time I watch it, I like gain a little bit more from it. And maybe I feel a little bit more like Alex one year. Maybe I feel a little more like Chris one year. And I get a lot from it. And he has so many different relationships and interactions throughout his whole journey. And each one of them is very important, and you can learn a lot from it, I think.
Yeah. All right. You just made a comment that I really want to dig into real quick. So you said sometimes you feel like Alex, sometimes you feel like Chris. Explain the difference of those two characters, how you see them.
So you have Chris, who he was born Chris.
Mm-hmm.
He lived as Chris through school. He was Chris when he was getting his degree for his parents. And then he left, and he became Alex. And I know that his like mindset doesn't really change, but he sort of undergoes a transformation throughout his journey into what Alex is. And then at the end, he signs the wood carving Alex, but then also signs Chris as well. I think kind of realizing he needs to be identified when they find him. Spoiler alert.
Right. So what you were just saying really, I mean, it's sort of how the movie kicks off when we see Alex carving into a piece of wood. He's carving this quote. And the quote is, 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom, an extremist. An aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. Escaped from Atlanta. Thou shalt not return because the West is the best. And now, after 2 rambling years, comes the final and greatest adventure. The climactic battle to kill the false being within and victoriously conclude the spiritual pilgrimage. 10 days and nights of freight trains and hitchhiking bring him to the great white north. No longer to be poisoned by civilization, he flees and walks alone upon the land to become lost in the wild. But that idea, the climactic battle to kill the false being within and victoriously conclude the spiritual pilgrimage. Because we watch a movie like this, and if you haven't seen it, we're going to spoil it because that's what we do here. But, he dies at the end. And so typically when you have the main character die at the end, we call that a tragedy. But I wouldn't call this movie a tragedy.
Right.
The tragedy is if he gave up his dreams and settled down in the slab city with his trailer park buddies or got adopted by Ron. And, that's the tragedy. Does he have, probably he regrets eating those berries or how he handled it. For sure the moose.
Oh yeah. It is weird because you have to think about it. It's tragic from all those characters' point of view of losing someone that they cared about. But he is this just human being who traveled through the world for those 2 years. And one of my favorite things when I talk about this movie to people is they say like, oh, well, he died when he was 23. There was so much life to live. It's like he lived more life in those 2 years than most people do in their entire lives.
Right.
It's sad that that it ended the way it did, and who knows what he would have done. He mentioned talking about writing a book, or sure it would have been successful or interesting because of the type of human being that he was, but we got what we got, and it's still very motivating.
There's a lot of ways I want to live a life like Alex Supertramp, where I'm not depending on the dollar. I'm not. And as he said one time, he's like, I burn my money because it makes you too comfortable.
Right.
If you don't have money, you're grinding, you're scrounging, you're doing a lot of stuff, but also you realize how little the money actually provides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said life was more exciting when I was penniless.
Right? That's crazy because people who have had both, they're like, oh, I'll pick, having a lot of pennies every time.
Yeah, and there's metaphor in there. Paul, the last thing I want you to do is go to Alaska and and I never see you again.
Right.
And my passion is music and film, and unfortunately those are sort of expensive endeavors. So I do need some pennies.
Right.
But I feel like we can all take, 5 or 10% of Alex and channel that into our lives without having to go to the extreme that he did.
Yeah. And that was his battle. I liked how you contrasted Chris and Alex. And Chris was the pose, the mask that he put on to appease his parents. He went to school. He did these things. He gave his dad this gift, but he didn't really want to because it was all about what the neighbors thought, what everybody else thought more than what was going on, what they didn't know. And it was all about appearance and kind of position. It's interesting you mentioned being off the socials. I've been off the socials because what I find is when I'm on there, like, oh, look at those pictures that those people did. I suck as a dad. Mm-hmm. Look at what trip they went on. Man, I would love to go on a trip. I look at these things and I compare myself to it. And it's just easier not to.
Yeah, it's theater. He mentions that there's an essence of theater in modern humanity, in modern society.
And there is a quote. I'm going to play this really quick clip as he's leaving, and you see, and his sister's narrating a lot of the film. And he's cutting up his ID. He's burning his social security card. He's cutting up. He gives most of his money off to a charity to feed the hungry. And she says, she's not sure what he's going to do, that he's, holds everybody and himself to this high moral standard that probably is pretty impossible to meet. But his sister says this line that I really loved about, like, she knew he was going to leave in the only way that he could.
It was inevitable that Chris would break away. And when he did, he would do it with characteristic immoderation.
I love that phrase, the characteristic immoderation. It reminded me of, have you read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey?
I haven't, but let me just add that to the list.
Yeah, for sure. It is fantastic. And he talks about going to Texas to go to, I think he was going to be a lawyer. And he's there and he's like, yeah, it's fine. It's whatever. And he gets drawn. He wants to go to film school. And he is really nervous about telling his dad about it. And he calls his dad and he's like, hey, Dad, I know we've planned for years that I'd come and go to law school. But I want to go to film school. I feel like this is where that's what I want to do, where I'm being led, where my calling is. And his dad, and I've talked to my boys, I was like, this is, when you talk to me, this is how I want to tell you, this is how I want to respond, is go ahead. Just don't half-ass it. You're all in.
Right.
And that's Alex, right? As he splits from Chris, the faults, the poser really in this is he's like, no, I am all in into what I'm going after, what I'm pursuing. And I'd be curious, like you said, you went to school for finance. And how did that shift for you to pursue music?
Well, and I want to be blatantly clear. The reasons that I feel like Alex and Chris has nothing to do with my relationship with my parents. My parents are incredible. They have more than supported me in this endeavor and dream of mine. I guess somewhere in college, around sophomore year. I mean, I'd always been involved in music. I played guitar since I was 13 and started to write songs a little bit towards the end of high school. And I met some guys and we eventually formed a band, started playing some shows. And I think that the first summer after that, I went back and I worked for, I did like an internship with Morgan Stanley. And I noticed, because one of my job was answering the phones, I noticed these people that were calling in and asking about their accounts and the stocks and all this. And they were fine, you know? They had more than enough for years, for them, for their kids, for their kids' kids. But they were still so caught up with it every day, so worried about it. And it started to just signal to me. I was like, is this what I want to do? Is this like how I want to spend my time? Not saying that it's bad if that's what you want to do, but just like looking inward at myself. And then the next year, our band started playing more, and I started to identify with that more. And then I moved over the summer to Nashville and did an internship at a studio. And immediately it was like, oh, this is it.
This is what I want to do.
Yeah, this is it for sure. So from that moment on, and you know, my parents kind of had the same thought that you did. They were like, all right, you realize that's a difficult path, so you better work really hard at it.
Yeah. And
I think I've done them justice. Obviously I've just kind of started, but I love it. I push for it every day. It's almost all I think about. So, and I'm grateful that they gave me that opportunity. And I remember I was talking to them. I don't know if it was my mom or my dad on the phone, and I had this realization because I was feeling a little guilty about the means that I'd come from, and you know, my ability to have a backup plan, whether it was my finance degree or you know, like them supporting me financially if it came to that, if I got in like a real bad spot. And I was like, I kind of feel bad that that's the case. And then I realized that I would be doing them a disservice to just take the easy route and not pursue something that I really wanted to do. Because that's why they worked so hard, so that I had that opportunity, so that I could go to the school I went to, meet the friends that I had, and pursue these creative endeavors. So it was kind of a change of mind around that same time, and that's when I was like, all right, let's put all the eggs in this basket. And you know, I thought that clip ended with a different song. I think that was Hard Sun that it ended with.
Yeah,
but the song that reminds me of what you're talking about there is Rise, the one that he plays on the mandolin. And it's not the first chorus, but the second one says, gonna rise up, find my direction magnetically, gonna rise up, throw down my ace in the hole, which is a great line because it relates to the movie about him navigating the world, finding my direction magnetically. And also, I mean, he threw his ace down in the hole right away. He burned his money. He sent that $24K off to somebody else who he thought it would benefit better. And I think that's awesome.
And like we said, we're not saying you should cut up your identification, run off, go to Alaska. Because there's a sense that it appears to be spontaneous. He appears to be frivolous, sort of flying by the seat of his pants. And in some ways he is, but in a lot of ways, he's also just pursuing what's there. He's prepared. Like he's studied, you know, the flora. He's got the books for the flora and fauna, so he knows what food to eat. He's practiced in the relative safety of the U.S. and maybe a little in Mexico to prepare for what's going to be much harder up in Alaska. And, you know, even when he's even planning it on, he's like, yeah, don't go up there at the winter. Wait till the spring. Go up when the winter's ending and you're going to have a chance. Don't go up at the worst time of the year. And even before then, he's training. He's like, well, I got to do some calisthenics, and then I'm going to go find some mountains and walk them every day to strengthen myself. And prep. He does do jobs because he does need money. It's super interesting we're having this conversation today because I am currently in the middle of a very similar crossroads, I feel like. I, have a degree and a master's degree in nursing, and I've got a job where I make really good money and don't have to work very much. And that makes it really comfortable. Like, it's like, okay, I can work 1 day a week and make enough basically to help us go on vacation or to fix up the house or whatever. But there's this other sense of, well, am I supposed to go all in? Because, if I'm working 1 day a week, that's 1 day that I'm not available for my grandson or for my wife or to work on the podcast or to work on filmmaking or to do all these other things that like you said, you feel like that's where you're being called. That's the direction that you're supposed to go. It's like, oh, it's in a sense, I feel like I've got a foot in each world.
Right. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that he was strategic about it. You can throw down your ace in the hole, but you still have to know how to play the game.
Right.
To know that you're going to have a good hand or whatever.
He didn't give all his money to
that. Well, he burned the money that he had in that moment, but then he had to go make some. He had to work at McDonald's or he had to work on that grain farm.
Yeah.
And prepare in order to be successful. So I think there's a lot that goes into that you can take from him, and I wonder how different the story would have been if he wasn't like a highly educated college kid, or if he hadn't done all that stuff first to prepare. I mean, I imagine the journey would have been a lot shorter, but I don't know. But I hope that as you go through that crossroads, you follow your passion while also, still maintaining the duties that we
being
have to those around us. I feel the same way. I mean, there were plenty of times, thank goodness I'm not, doing it anymore. But when I was waiting tables, or I just wanted to dump the tray on the ground and walk out. But it's like, we have a mortgage.
Right. I can't do that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the other interesting things about this movie is wherever Alex went, and really by now he's turning into Alex, people fell in love with him. Like you mentioned about Will, you just fell in love with him. But it's a very similar thing for Alex as he went around, whether it's Wayne or Rainey and Jan or Ron. I mean, Ron's freaking talking about adopting him as his grandson.
Yeah, that was a tough scene.
Oh, and well, yeah, because we know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
It's that thing of, oh yeah, I'll tell you this when I get back. You're like, maybe you shouldn't wait. But that he also was very, like, I think a lot of times when we're pursuing our passion or our path, we tend to think we can do it alone. We think that, oh, I need to do this. I need to handle this. But he's very easily accepts other people's help. I guess the appropriate people's, right? Like, I mean, he stays, I don't know how long he stays with Rainey and Jan or Ron. Like, he has dinners with him. He's making the belt and doing all this and learning about how to butcher something when he kills it.
From Zach Galifianakis.
And I think that's a valuable lesson for us as we're doing this, is admitting we don't know, but also being willing to listen, take, Wayne's a crazy dude, listen to some of it, throw out some of it maybe. But this, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but the people that he left behind, he had an impact on, even though he wasn't there very long.
Right. For someone who had severe mommy and daddy issues, he certainly attracted father and mother figures who cared deeply for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see that, I think, primarily, especially that mothering role with Jan, and there's a scene where they're playing in the beach in the ocean, and you hear him narrating as they're playing, and he said, "I don't like the water, but I'm going to get in so that I can conquer my fear." And so what he says, what he narrates while they're on this scene, I think is important as we're sort of stepping into our own adventure to discover, or I guess solidify, who we really are.
The sea's only gifts are harsh blows, and occasionally the chance to feel strong. Now, I don't know much about the sea, but I do know that that's the way it is here. And I also know how important it is in life not necessarily to be strong, but to feel strong. To measure yourself at least once. To find yourself at least once in the most ancient of human conditions. Facing the blind, deaf stone alone, with nothing to help you but your hands and your own head.
So what stood out for you in that, Grayson?
The challenge aspect. I think that's so important. I mean, I know this podcast that we're mostly speaking to men. I think it's important for women too, but for men, I mean, that's crucial to find something that challenges you. You can only get better if you're being challenged. And again, in the theme of taking 5 or 10% of Alex, what does that challenge mean, or what does that connection mean? And for me, I know that whenever I'm overwhelmed or feeling moody or just feeling lost, things like going and taking a hike where I can't see a road, I can't see, many people, hopefully no one, and I'm just in nature. A simple hike has helped. Sometimes more drastic things also help too. I'll never forget, me and my wife took a trip. We were in like Northern California in the Redwood Forest, and we were hiking and driving a van all around, just kind of exploring. And I mean, that truly felt like living. And we did a long hike that felt challenging, but there was just something about like being out there that really made me feel alive. It made me feel like a man. It put me in touch with my existence.
And it's really easy to not do that, to not put ourselves in that position. We'll go up to the North Carolina mountains every so often, and my wife loves to hike. And I'm like, okay, well, we're in the car for like 2 hours, and then you want to go for a hike, and then I got to drive back for 2 hours, like, and you get one of those hikes, and typically it's the summertime, so you're getting a really good sweat on.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't really want to come back all hot and sweaty. And it's an interesting thing because it sounds super bougie and lame when I say it out loud. But I think there's an aspect where like I kind of don't want to get in the water and get hit. It's like all there is waves that are going to beat you up. I don't want to engage in this because what if, what is it? All I have to battle is my hands and my head.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what if I get knocked down? What if I get taken out? What if whatever the worst scenario is? Because even when Alex was trying to go through, and he's first, they're like, oh, you got to get a permit, and then he's in Mexico, and then he's on a train, and then I think one of the coolest and painful scenes was when he got jerked out of the train and got beat up. And the way they told it was very good, because it's really easy to look at it like a fairy tale road. Like, I'm going to go to Alaska and I accomplished my dream, because we don't often share the times we got pulled out of the train and got our butts kicked.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I guess the worst case scenario would be never trying, or at least that's what he's trying to say. Failure is the greatest teacher. You really learn a lot when you fail at things, and I've certainly learned a lot about that. through my experiences and through my career. And I think if you asked some of the top like creators in the world, they would probably agree with that sentiment. And I don't think any of them had no hesitations when they first started out or were starting the project that it really defined them.
Yeah. And even early on, the flash flood takes out his car. It's like that would have seemed like a perfect time to turn tail and head home. And he doubled down because that's when he burned his money.
Right. He got close a second time. I think it was when he got back to Los Angeles. He'd obviously been through a lot, going back through the border.
Yeah.
The train. And he saw himself in that restaurant, and that was enough for him to almost run away again. He was all the way across the country from where he ran away from, and he was like, I got to go.
I can't be that guy.
Right.
My wife and I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a couple years ago, and in the U2 display, they had multiple rejection letters from record companies. I'm just like, you know what? If U2 got rejected multiple times, there's no reason to think that we won't face that same sort of pressure, that same feedback. And hopefully, and it can either drive you to quit or it can drive you to succeed. Like I know when I ask somebody, hey, can you read this thing I wrote or look at this, little short film I made? What do you think? It's good. That is not helpful at all. But at the same time, you do want to hear that because conversely, then I wrestle with the, oh no, they're going to say it sucks. I shouldn't be writing. What am I doing any of this for?
Back to the above all value truth, though. I mean, it's a disservice to you if you made something and, maybe it's not awful, but maybe it's not great. And for someone to be like, that's amazing. Can't believe you did that. We need people in our lives to be like, cool. Here's some things to work on. This is what I saw. That's really valuable to have someone in your life like that, to give you honest feedback, which hurts, right? It makes you better.
Yeah. People have asked me before. They've sent me some, hey, would you look at this? This is a blog post I'm working on. Let me know what you think. And it's like, okay. It's like, this, I really like what you did. I'd change this, and this. It's not my voice. It's your voice, but you asked for my feedback. I don't hear back a lot of times.
Yeah. That's the other thing too. Sometimes you're lucky if you even get feedback. I also imagine that Eddie Vedder probably had a voice teacher tell him he didn't sing very well once upon a time, but
right.
Look at him now.
I'm trying to think. There's actually, I was just looking at it was something like the songs that shaped the 90s, and they were talking about Pearl Jam. I haven't read the article. I just saw that, but the whole thing of, like you said, for anybody, and we focus a lot talking about writers and filmmakers and singers and musicians and creatives and that sort of thing. They put themselves out there, right? And so it's hard to put yourself out there because there's a sense you're like, oh, did they get it? Did they understand it? Do they approve? Do they like it? What if they reject, if they reject your song, are they rejecting me as a human being?
Mm-hmm.
But we do the same thing. I mean, as a husband, there's times where like, okay, I can engage in this and be a husband, a loving husband, and pursuing my wife's heart, or, doing a lot of things, or how am I engaging with my wife? How am I engaging with my kids? Because I might not get it right. I'm going to change that. I will not get it right 100% of the time.
Oh man. I'd like to meet the guy who does. I'm not very good at that game. Are we listening or are we solving a problem game? I often don't know which one. If I just listened better, I would be better at it. But again, we're evolving. You got to fail, right? A couple times.
That's so funny. I had that exact conversation with my wife last week. We went out for dinner and she's telling me about problems at work. I mean, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And we're walking out. I'm like, was I supposed to just say, wow, that's tough? Or like, were you looking for like feedback for like, what were you looking for? It's like, it's fine. Like, oh, I screwed up again. It's date night and I ruined it. I didn't, but we went and saw Jagged Little Pill, which she loved because she loves Alanis Morissette's music. And there were some good scenes, but like the characters were sort of cliched and felt like an after school special. But that was my take on it. My wife thought it was great. So
Did you explain your take on it on the ride home?
yeah, that did not go well. Like, I'm glad you liked it. It's like, I'm sorry you didn't like it. I'm like, it was fine. It's not like I've seen worse. We went to this horrible Cinderella ballet a few years ago and took my son wanted to go. But when we got there, it was one, I didn't realize it was a ballet because we have tickets for musicals. So I thought it was going to be some sort of musical. And from what I thought it was the story of Cinderella as if it was set in World War I in London. So I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And we get there and it's some creepy, dark ballet that is like really disturbing. It's like, oh, I regret coming here and making my son, who was like, oh, because he had been in Cinderella in middle school. He'd been in the play. And so he's like, oh, let's do that. And when I was like, oh, this is terrible. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, they say like all mediums are valid, but ballet is one that I just have a hard time with. And speaking of conversations with our wives, talk about our future kids, and I'm like, and she's, very adamant. If we have a daughter, she's going to do ballet. And I'm like, she'll do jujitsu and golf.
She can do them all.
She can. That's right. I'm over preparing.
That's right. There you go. Just
Whatever
do
she
all
wants.
the things. Yeah. Yeah. And then you turn into the parents from the movie.
That's true. Oh man.
There's
what
no
have I done?
So as we sort of round the turn towards home, I wanted to bring up a conversation that Alex has with Ron, who's played by Hal Holbrook. And again, as you mentioned, these father figures keep appearing in his life to speak, to guide him, to support him, to encourage him, to provide some direction. And they're having this conversation. Ron takes him out to his camp. It's like this camp of dope smokers and nudists. And he's like, don't you feel nervous? What are you doing? You're just living in the dirt. And he asked him, he's like, you're only 23. Why don't you do something? And then Alex kind of turns the tables on him and they start hiking up a mountain, which is also, I think we see both I unfortunately relate to Ron too many times in this scene, both in what I value most and as well as the hardships that I say, oh, there's a nice view up there. No, thanks. That's just too high.
23 years old, son, don't you think you ought to be getting an education and a job and making something of this life?
Look, Mr. Franz, I think careers are a 20th century invention, and I don't want one. You don't need to worry about me. I have a college education. I'm not destitute. I'm living like this by choice.
In the dirt?
Yeah. In the dirt.
Where's your family?
Don't have one anymore.
That's a shame.
Hey, Mr. Franz, I want to show you something. Come on. Come on.
It's getting a little steep. A little high for me, kid.
All right, but Even from halfway out, it's quite a sight, isn't it? And from the top, you can see all the way to the Salton Sea, too.
You can see the Salton Sea from up there?
Yes, sir.
My goodness.
You don't want to go up?
Nope. I don't do these kind of things.
So that first half of that scene, where he's like, why don't you get a job, make some money, get a career? And Alex is basically like, why would I want to do that? You know, why would I want to, be stuck living some boring life when I could be living? He's like, I chose this life. And the hard thing I have is when I'm living the life that I'm choosing is getting worried about what the Rons of this world are thinking. Like, oh, what is this guy going to think? And sometimes it's, my friends, sometimes it's my brother, my parents. What are they thinking? How are they thinking? What are they going to be? How are they going to react to my choices and the way I'm living my life? Which is probably not a great way to choose.
Man, that's just that hits me in the soft spot, because a lot of the times when I'm creating, I find myself creating through the lens of, man, what are my friends going to think about this? Are they going to think that it sounds good? Are they going to like my point of view? Are they going to share it to their friends, or are they going to put it in a group and make fun of me? And it's like, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Right. And
it's hard to get out of that. And I guess what we have to focus on is the people around us. The later Rons, not that Ron.
Right.
But the Ron who kind of comes to terms with, all right, I get it. I get you have to do your adventure. I just care about you.
Right.
And I think we both have people in our lives, and you've discussed one of them with Will on here, who is a rock for me. And, like my parents, my wife, Will, a lot of people in my life who are foundations for me to keep going, because I know their truth, and I know they want to hear my truth. And when that is loud enough, all the other stuff kind of gets drowned out. It creeps back up all the time, but the more you get used to that, and the more that you become comfortable with putting yourself out there and embracing that challenge, the challenges don't feel quite as hard anymore, and they get to be extremely exciting.
Yeah. And that's almost to come back full circle to where we started of, because what we see Ron do, Ron walks halfway up the slope and he's like, oh, it's getting a little steep for me, getting a little tough. I don't do this sort of thing. And Alex is like, if you come the rest of the way, you can see all the way to the Salton Sea or Salton City. And he's like, wow, that far? Yeah, I'm not going to do it. Because sometimes just the fact of going is enough. Like you mentioned, the sort of being afraid of what are they going to think? And that's really what Ron's saying in those moments is, I'm not strong enough to make it up the hill. I might slip. I might fall. I don't do this sort of thing. When really the tragedy is when I'm like Ron. We mentioned before, was this a tragedy because Alex dies at the end? And I would say no, because he's, doing the whole William Wallace thing. Every man dies, not every man truly lives. And he truly lived for that time that he was on the road. And what we see in that scene we just talked about is Ron says, no, I don't do that anymore. And he doesn't proceed. He doesn't go on. That would be the tragedy. If when Alex got beat up off the train, if he goes home, if when he gets back to LA, he calls his folks and heads back to Atlanta. I think in a lot of ways, that's the tragedy. Right. Is when we say, this is too hard. I can't do this anymore. And we give up. And he didn't even sit there to enjoy the view that he had halfway up the hill. He's like, even halfway up, isn't it great? He's like, yeah, I'm going back down to my truck.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're, one of their first interactions is Ron trying to call him out for not making anything of his life. And then there are further conversations, when Ron is given a chance to basically talk about his life, he talks about his loss, his tragedy, him overcoming that, getting sober, and then it's nothing. And then he's like, and now I'm here.
Fast forward like 50 years, right?
It's like, well, Ron, I mean, do you just make a bunch of belts in between that? And, if you did, and that's your passion, that's great. But I think Alex was like, get out there. And he also, it took him calling him an old man, but he got him up there. Sometimes you do need that. And I felt like Ron in that situation because as Will knows better than anyone, the best way to make me do something is tell me that I can't do it.
Oh, yeah. That's the contrarian in you.
Yeah, it's bad.
And so we're going to talk about that scene, the scene with the second scene with Ron, where he actually gets up and goes up the hill. I think we're actually going to put it on our YouTube channel because it's all visual. There's not a lot. I mean, there's talking, but you really have to see it. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to put it up on our YouTube channel. So check us out over there. And then we'll be back to close out the episode. So to the end of the movie, where the way that the movie's cut and edited, the story that they tell, it appears as if Chris and Alex have made peace with each other. He's ready to go home. Like, I think I feel like that's where he's heading, is back home. And then the river's too high. He can't get across. He's trapped. He mislabels some berries in his desperation for hunger. And there's the scene we talked about on the YouTube channel at the end where Ron talks about how when you forgive, you love, and God's light shines on you. And then the sun comes out from behind the cloud and it lights up and they're laughing about it. And you see that same thing as he dies, basically, in the movie. The sun comes back out and shines on him after he had written, like you said. And then that sign that he had posted said both Alex and Chris. And again, it feels weird. It's kind of stepping into a story that we don't really know the ending, but the way that they told the story, it appears as if forgiveness was found. Like, he came at peace with both who he was and who his parents were.
I do remember he says that he's thankful, which, to be able to say that you're thankful while you're starving to death in the middle of Alaska, you're so skinny that a grizzly bear won't even touch you. I mean, that takes real courage, but also an understanding of his purpose. And I think throughout the whole film, you see him reiterate to people, like, no, this is my plan. And they're like, you're crazy. You could die. And he's like, yeah. And a lot of them see that maybe as young, like, this kid's young, he's naive, he doesn't really know. Alaska's a long way away. Maybe he'll figure it out before he gets there. But I think he really had his plan and his challenge in mind. And, you could say he failed because he didn't survive, but he also succeeded in his goal of challenging himself in general. We talked about it earlier. I don't know what would have happened. Would we have a movie if he made it back? Yeah. Probably not. If we did, I don't know if it would be as good. But I'm thankful that this got made and that it was an assigned reading, because it's had an impact on my life. It really has.
Yeah,
I think about it a lot.
I would definitely encourage you to read the book and watch the movie.
And listen to the soundtrack.
Yeah, soundtrack is pretty awesome. That might be why Grayson likes it. That might be his best part of it.
There's a big heart, son. That's my Eddie Vedder.
So Grayson, thanks for pointing me back to this movie. I hadn't seen it in a long time. But it's encouraging, even though it sort of has a sad ending, it's still encouraging to pursue and follow, even when, bad stuff, setbacks, tragedy might happen. That doesn't necessarily take us off track of where we're heading or look at how far, like you said, he accomplished the goal that he set before him. Like he made it to Alaska. He survived in Alaska and just, to a point. And I think a lot of times we don't even try to go to Alaska because we're afraid of what possible negative outcomes are. But I think the biggest negative outcome we could have is not getting up in the first place. Like he says, Ron, he's like, get off your butt. So get off your butts, get out there, engage in some adventure, engage in some pursuit and something that has a little bit of risk to it. Because you'll find as you take a little bit of risk, you get a little more comfortable with it and you take bigger risks. And who knows where that might lead you.
5 to 10%. Alexander Supertramp.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Grayson Foster talking about Into the Wild. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?